Today we're going to talk about the properties of acids and bases. You should have this note, except your version is less filled in. In class, we would perform a bunch of these reactions and record the results. If you're missing that class, then just copy them down from the screen here. So if you have a solution and you don't know what it is, there's basically three options. Your solution could be an acid, it could be neutral, like water, for example, or it could be a base. And this is how you can test that unknown solution and figure out which category it belongs in. If you know the chemical formula of the compound, then you can figure out, is it an acid or a base, or is it neutral? If your chemical formula starts with an H, this X here in the example could be anything else. But if you have a chemical formula that starts with an H, it's automatically an acid. If you have a chemical formula that ends in OH, this X could be any kind of metal. Then as soon as you see OH, which is a hydroxide, then you know it's going to be a base. So if it doesn't start with an H, and if it doesn't end with an OH, then you know that your compound's going to be neutral. In terms of chemical hazards, both acids and bases are corrosive, so you can't use that property to figure out which is which. But if it's not corrosive, then you know that it's a neutral solution. The definition of an acid is any compound, when you put it in water, it falls apart and makes some hydrogen ions or some H1 pluses. And that's what causes the solution to become corrosive or acidic. Any base, when you put it in water, it makes these things called hydroxide ions or these OH1 minuses. And that's what makes a base corrosive as well. When you have neutral things and you put them in water, they don't make these hydrogen or hydroxide ions. You can also distinguish if something is an acid or a base based on how it tastes. Now, this isn't something that we would do in a chemical lab due to safety reasons. But if you're at home in the kitchen, you can tell if something is acidic or basic if you taste it. First of all, acids usually taste sour. So if you think of all the acidic things that you have at home, if you have vinegar, which its main ingredient is called acetic acid, that's got that sour taste. But also too, like citrus fruits, like lemons, limes, they have a compound called citric acid in them, and that's why they're sour. Bases, on the other hand, taste bitter. So a lot of people don't like really deep green vegetables because of that bitter flavor. So you think of like Brussels sprouts or collard greens or even broccoli. Some people don't like those because of that bitter taste to them. Neutral solutions don't either taste sour or bitter. In terms of texture, acidic solutions and neutral solutions kind of have a watery texture to them, but bases have a very typical slippery or soapy texture to them, which is important to know because if you spill a base, then you really have two hazards. Number one, they are corrosive, so they can eat away metal and eat away skin, but also two, they're difficult to clean up. So if you spill a base on the floor, it can become a slip, trip, and fall hazard because of this soapy texture that it has. And the following are tests that you can use, chemical tests that you can see if an unknown compound is acidic, basic, or if it's neutral. If you mix in your unknown solution with magnesium, it'll do a reaction with the magnesium, if it's an acid, and make some hydrogen bubbles. So that's a very quick and easy way to tell that you have an acid. Because only acids do that reaction with that magnesium. Neutral compounds don't, and bases don't as well. You can also test acids by mixing in some baking soda. If you mix baking soda in with an acid, you'll see some bubbles again, but there'll be CO2 bubbles this time. And nothing will happen with neutral or basic solutions. We also have these chemical tests using what's called an AcidBase indicator. An indicator is just a chemical that changes color depending on what solution it's in. So if it's in an acid, it's one color, but if it's in a base, it's another. And there's several acid-base indicators out there that we can use. Two very common ones are litmus and phenolphthalein. What you can do is you can take this chemical called litmus, soak some paper in it, let it dry, and you can have two different kinds of litmus paper, blue litmus and red litmus. And if you have some blue litmus paper and you dip it in an acid, it'll turn red. If you dip it in something neutral or in something basic, then it stays blue. You can also get red litmus paper. If you dip it in an acid, it will stay red, but if you dip it in something neutral, it will stay red. But if you dip it in something that's basic, it'll turn blue. So one of our 5 signs of a chemical change, remember, is you see a color change. So if you see a color change with either blue litmus or red litmus, then that's what's called a positive test or a positive identification. If your paper stays the same color, you can't guarantee what kind of chemical it is. So that's why there's 2 different kinds of litmus papers, one blue, one red. And whenever you see a color change, then that's going to identify. So it's always good to have both there. If you have a solution and you take some blue litmus and dip it in and it stays blue, then that means it might be neutral or it might be a base. So that's why you have the red litmus as well. If you dip in some red litmus and it stays red, but your blue litmus stayed blue, then you know you have a neutral solution. The other very common indicator is called phenolphthalein. It's kind of hard to spell. It's got this awkward PHTH in the middle there. But this chemical here, it stays clear in an acid and in a neutral solution, but it turns this nice pinky purple color when it's in a base. Again, whenever you see a color change, then that's a positive test, or you can truly identify your solution. The other thing you can do is you can buy pH paper or a pH meter. And acids always have a pH that is less than 7, where water has a pH of 7, and other neutral things have a pH of 7 as well. And bases always have a pH greater than 7. We'll talk more about what pH stands for and how it gets measured in another lesson. Pause the video here and try out this acid-base worksheet at the bottom of the chart. Can you identify the substances as being either an acid, a base, or being neutral based on the description in the question? Here are the answers. KOH, because it ends with OH at the end of the formula, that's a base. But H3P, because it starts with an H, that's an acid. Any chemical that starts with an H is an acid. Any chemical that ends with OH or hydroxide is known as a base. For question C and D, we're just using pH. If we have a pH that's greater than 7, like 7.8, then that's a base. But if it's less than 7, then it's an acid. Any chemical that changes phenolphthalein pink is known as a base. If it does not react with baking soda, it could either be a base or it could be something neutral. For G, if it reacts with magnesium, it could be an acid. For H, the chemical found in lemon juice. Well, lemons taste sour, so it's going to be an acid. If they tasted bitter, then we would say it was a base. For I, if blue litmus stays blue and red litmus stays red, then that is going to be a neutral solution. It didn't change either color of the litmus, so it's not an acid or a base. And for J, it makes H1 pluses when it's dissolved in water. That's the definition of an acid.